So I finally watched Obsession, and I have some thoughts. First one, it's very good, you should go and see it. Spoilers throughout the rest of this video. But it seems to have struck a chord with Gen Z, and I say this as an elder Zoomer who achieved escape velocity from the hellscape of modern dating. I met my wife on Hinge a few years ago. Even though the characters themselves code millennial, because there's not a lot of digital social interaction, they go out to bars, they have a relatively cohesive friendship circle, the lockdown generation, we didn't get much in-person socializing, we don't drink a lot, and there isn't a lot of social media in the movie. There's just one scene where Bear self-soothes by stalking Nikki's Instagram, which she's clearly using to crowdsource validation from. Even though the characters themselves code millennial, it resonates with Zoomers, as I said in the following X post, because this is both men and women's worst nightmare in modern dating. The common read of the film is that Bear is a predatory man. I mean, he's named Bear, so there's a bit of meme magic there with the meme that was going around about a year or so ago when feminists were saying they'd be rather alone with a bear in the woods than a man in the woods because they trust the bear more. And that the female nightmare is about being robbed of her agency, and there's certainly an element of that. But, and I saw this film with my wife and I ran this past her, the female nightmare in Obsession is to wake up one day and realize that you've been in a relationship with a man that you are repulsed by, that it's going nowhere, and that you've wasted your life. And you therefore feel violated, as if you've had your agency taken away from you, even if you haven't been. And the nightmare for men is having entered into a relationship after going through all the risks of rejection, and one day, inexplicably, your girlfriend goes from enthusiastic, infatuated, besotted with you, to crying uncontrollably, being inconsolable, screaming at you in public for minor infractions and things that you don't understand. And, of course, the supernatural element distorts this a bit in the film, but the characters still resonate with the respective members of these sexes. And it's because modern dating has been destroyed by a lack of courtship rituals, a lack of, I don't want to say adult supervision, but elders on the sidelines guiding you through this important stage of life so that you make choices that are in your long-term best interest, right? You select a spouse because they are going to be a good husband or wife and a good father or mother. But there's no real talk of having children in any of the relationships in the film. And there's no presence of parents or concerned elders. There's just like one boomer that runs the music shop that they all work at, which is also a bit of a Zoomer anachronism, but nevertheless. Neither Sarah nor Ian call their parents during anything that's weird that's going on in the film. The only parent that is mentioned is Nikki's estranged father, who she fabricates having cancer after becoming possessed by the One Wish Willow to engender some sympathy for her into Bear to get him to invest early on. We'll get onto that in a moment. And then Bear lives in his dead grandmother's house, and he hasn't been bothered to change any of the decor, and his laziness, his lack of taking responsibility, is what causes his cat to die, because the cat gets into his grandmother's medication somehow and overdoses on oxycodone. And because there are no adults around, shepherding them through this important stage of life, they make terrible choices, and they select their respective partners based on hedonism and insecurity. Based on who makes me feel validated, who staves off my crippling sense of loneliness, or who will put out first. And this leads to either a series of listless hookups without commitment between Nikki and Ian, or unrequited feelings never being expressed by both Sarah and Bear, or the disastrous, rapid onset love bombing by possessed Nikki towards Bear. And I'll focus on the male side first. Nikki is the characteristic BPD girlfriend. And men will get this when they leave it too late to date, or they don't put themselves out there, they don't risk rejection, and they will find a woman who is almost their soulmate. She presents herself as having been out there all along, perfect for you. You won't believe that you have gotten so lucky as to meet this woman she will say things like, "You complete me," or as Nikki does in the film, "I can't live without you." And it's because she has an unstable sense of self, she has a deficit in her own identity, she has crippling feelings of inadequacy and being insufficient. And this causes emotional volatility, which is why when, after possessed Nikki makes a scene reading out that tale of Hansel and Gretel, featuring sort of an incestuous sexual relationship between Hansel and Gretel, obviously meant to be a reference to the fact that she sees Bear more as a brother and she's being forced against the real Nikki's will to enter into an intimate relationship with him. And it's also something that Nina Power talks about, the sibling economy, which means that men and women interact with each other rather than as complementary sexes, but almost as like rival siblings, more Cain and Abel than Adam and Eve. And that's why normal relationships are difficult to form for young people, because you can't excuse having one another in your life if you're competing for the same resources, the same recognition online. Anyway, after Nikki makes a scene at the party where she temporarily regains consciousness and tries to stab herself in the face with a bottle, when she returns home with Bear, and Bear is trying to live with the cognitive dissonance of knowing that Nikki doesn't actually want to be him because he's already called the custom helpline and heard her screaming, harrowing down the phone, and is also asking her, "Do you like me? Does the real Nikki like me?" Nikki threatens suicide. And this isn't the only time that she insinuates that she will harm Bear or herself if she is abandoned. When she is standing in the corner and watching him sleep, she is wailing, saying that she doesn't think the Bear loves her as much as she loves him. And when she climbs into bed and Bear thinks she's asleep and attempts to creep out of bed, she shrieks, "Stay," in a really threatening way. Of course, towards the end, she's pounding on the bathroom door as he's either trying to work up the courage to shoot himself or when he eventually ODs. They use threats of violence or emotional instability, essentially like childish, toddler-style meltdowns, which is why it's so unsettling to see a behavior that you would see from a child in a grown woman. They use this to lock the object of their idealization, because they put their partner on a pedestal so that they can feel like this perfect person is with them to quiet their own sense of inadequacy and insecurity. They will threaten the partner, they will use threats to themselves, they'll use emotional instability, they will lie impulsively, like when Nikki, when initially under the influence of the One Wish Willow, tries to mirror Bear's behavior and says that her cat's died, then corrects herself, and then fabricates that her father has cancer, again to engender sympathy, to try and put Bear in the position of a knight in shining armor coming to our rescue, playing into the male ego, bypassing his sort of threat detection by sort of love bombing him and making herself out to be this perfect person. They will use all of these manipulative emotional tricks to lower your defenses, to use you as a way of soothing their own insecurities. And then, when that need becomes insatiable, the relationship will consume them, and then they will essentially consume their partner. This is a sort of classic, like, Black Widow trope. And Bear gets this because this is the hell you create for yourself and others when you're incapable of being honest. The entire friendship group is dishonest with one another. Sarah doesn't confess her feelings to Bear. Also, there are external markers that Sarah is, although a compassionate person, quite a damaged and insecure person. Frequently, tattoos have crossover with a desire to harm yourself in psychological literature, and well, the septum ring piercing rule goes undefeated, right? Nevertheless, she's quite a nice character, but she doesn't profess her feelings to Bear and could have spared him the entire situation. Bear doesn't profess his feelings to Nikki. When he is trying to pluck up the courage to tell Nikki how he feels, Ian sabotages that by, in the opening scene of the film, when Bear is subjecting a diner waitress to his rehearsed pouring out of his emotions. Ian says this is cringe, tells him to be inauthentic, tells him he has nothing but time, even though Ian presumably knows that Nikki is going to quit her job to go and become a writer and actually leave the town, because Ian has been secretly hooking up with Nikki behind Bear's back, despite knowing how Bear feels towards Nikki. Nikki isn't honest towards Bear about that, and she also isn't looking for love in the way that she says she needs love. Because she says she needs to feel love in order to write a love story. And Bear asks, is that a romance? And she says it's not the same thing. Bear obviously thinks it's the same thing, which means that he is emotionally immature and therefore cannot have a reciprocal relationship, because anything without reciprocity is exploitation, which is why the relationship that he forces Nikki to have using the One Wish Willow is exploitative. But Nikki herself isn't honest because, and this is one of the complications of modern dating, how can you have a committed relationship with someone when you're using social media to crowdsource your self-esteem? Because when Bear looks at her Instagram, she has thousands of likes and loads of comments on each post, and she's posting a lot of selfies of herself, presenting an idealized lifestyle to the rest of the world, and farming validation from men online. And this is something that plenty of Zoomer men will have experienced. You'll get into a relationship with a girl, and she will continue to use her social media to present herself to the world as if she is available, because she's essentially addicted to male validation. And whereas porn is porn for men, online attention is porn for women. And that's another thing that actually is not representative of the Zoomer dating experience, especially for single men. There's no use of porn in the film. Instead, Instagram stalking is used by Bear as a kind of surrogate for that, because he is obsessed with Nikki. The thing that is representative of Zoomer dating, though, is that, like Bear, many Zoomer men indefinitely defer the date at which they make their move on any woman. So there's a study back in 2023 by Alexander of the website Date Psychology, and he surveyed men of different age groups, and he found that in 2022 to 2023, 59% of men within the 18 to 25 age group, that's still Zoomers, did not approach anyone in the past year. No cold approaches, no asking women on a date in a friendship setting. And it's because dating apps have become digital intermediaries and they don't have our best interests at heart, right? They promise this hypothetical perfect person always within reach, but they ration your ability to meet that person so that they can either sell you subscription fees or keep you on the app to sell you ads, because that's their business model. The same thing with social media. It promises this constant stream of validation and affirmation and compliments to women, and it presents this hypothetical buffet of infinite options, of travel and lavish lifestyles, and even a better guy just waiting around the corner, so you never commit to the guy that's in front of you. This is why many women end up in situationships. They sort of settle for becoming one woman among many in a series of hookups without commitment, hoping that the guy will settle down with them eventually if they just keep sleeping with him, and then they feel betrayed or violated by this arrangement because they have hypothetically agreed to something which goes against female nature, and so they feel as if they've given up their intimacy for nothing. And I think this is actually one of the reasons why this meme took off. So there's a scene, obviously, at the party where Bear pulls out a Jenga block and is told to kiss the person to his left, and that's Sarah. And the camera comedically pans to Nikki making this face. I mean, the actress does a phenomenal job. Loads of people thought this was edited online. Nope, this is like what it is, exactly like what it is in the movie. And the caption for this meme, which has now been seen almost 66 million times, was, "How your girlfriend looks at you when you ask her to block the guy who raped her in 2019. Now, in a post-Me Too environment, the word rape has been used widely and improperly. And I say this having a friend who was falsely accused of this by a woman who then recanted, and it almost ruined his life. He's doing very well now, but the word is used as a weapon by some ill-motivated women against men. Not all, of course, and there are far too many unprosecuted rapes going on. There are far too many that are committed by people who never needed to be in our respective countries in the first place. Nevertheless, the meme seems to have struck a chord and really angered many women, because I think the mismatched expectations of men and women in modern relationships, caused by a lack of courtship rituals, caused by being left to our own devices, and therefore we fall afoul of the specific vices that both men and women have to one another. With men, it can be cowardice and a fear of rejection that causes you to manipulate women, like Bear does with the One Wish Willow. You know, he fumbles the bag when he's asked by Nikki, "Do you like me?" and then tries to achieve a shortcut instead. He tries to get the unearned. He isn't virtuous or courageous enough to actually win Nikki's affections, and so he decides to have her alter himself by supernatural means instead. And you can sort of forgive Bear at first, because who would believe that this gimmick toy from the 80s with a little jingle actually works? But when he realizes that Nikki is actually under the thrall of the One Wish Willow, he can hear her screaming over the customer service line when she temporarily regains consciousness in his bed and asks him to kill her to set her free. He says, "Oh, is it really that bad being with me?" And then the real Nikki says, "You've never been with me, Bear." He knows, and he keeps her in this state anyway because he's afraid of being abandoned. And then that fear of abandonment is mirrored in the possessed version of Nikki, who will go to such lengths to not feel abandoned that she will duct tape the door shut, or threaten him if he tries to sneak out of bed at night, or threaten to kill herself if he leaves, or go so far as, in the end, of course, using the One Wish Willow herself in the possessed state to force him to feel as obsessed with her as she is with him. But the reason this meme made so many women angry, and the reason the term rape is improperly used in the post-Me Too era, we shouldn't understate the level to which Me Too hysteria has discouraged men from approaching women, per the previous study, is that women feel violated if they have given something intimate and private of themselves to men that they feel haven't appreciated it and haven't reciprocated with commitment. And this has happened with plenty of women. And this is why you shouldn't do this, because you end up creating the kind of unstable women that Nikki, under the influence of the One Wish Willow, becomes, and you send her off like an emotional suicide bomber into some other guy's life. Now, again, we aren't meant to sympathize with Bear in this film, because he is as much a willing participant to this scenario as Nikki is terrifying and perpetuating it. And it's because, not that he really thought the One Wish Willow would work, the turning point for the narrative isn't even when he phones the customer service helpline. It's when he is told by Ian that Nikki has fabricated the claim that her father has cancer, and he sits down at dinner and says it doesn't matter because she throws a tantrum in the middle of the restaurant when he tries to force her to be honest about it. He then becomes complicit in the lie. And it's, again, this lack of ability to be honest. It's this wanting something at the expense of it being authentic and earned. It's the ultimate Faustian bargain, right? It's that causes Bear to be the guilty party in this situation. Because Nikki doesn't want any of this. Like, okay, again, sure, Nikki may have been an imperfect person. I mean, lots of the group were doing drugs. She was giving her friend's money away to a random homeless person who was then going to probably go and do drugs. She seems directionless in life. There's no urgency in her mid-20s to have a committed relationship. She's hooking up with Ian, despite it being against her own best interests, and despite, because women are very emotionally perceptive, right? I miss all sorts of like relationship dynamics that my wife will pick up on, despite knowing that Bear likes her. Because she confronts him about it. She picks up on the fact that he is like trying to neg her and has bought her a gift, which she feels uncomfortable about. But she's still using him as a repository for her emotions to phone him up and dump. She is still using him for free car rides home. She knows that he is emotionally invested in her in a way that she isn't in him, and in a way she is exploiting him at that point. Now, his exploitation is way worse, to the point of where, I mean, it is rape, when he is having sex with her immobile body, and the possessed part of her is feigning ecstasy while she is laying there motionless and experiencing this as a horrific assault. And again, by that point, he already knows that she's lied, and he knows that she is emotionally unstable, but he so wants this to be true that he's willing to participate in the lie. And it is this inability to be honest, this inability to take rejection and move forward with courage, it is that lack of virtue that would have him earn a relationship honestly otherwise, that is why Nikki is reduced, and I think this is intentional by the director, is reduced to a childlike state. And that's what makes her behavior so uncomfortable. It's what makes the relationship itself so unnerving. Bear, in his inability to have a reciprocal relationship because he doesn't want to risk rejection, either wants a dependent child or a pet instead of a partner or a spouse. This is why Nikki stands in one spot and defecates on herself on the carpet when Bear leaves for work. It's why she has this sort of childish giggle and these toddler tantrums and talks in a sort of babbling way. It's why when Bear comes back home from work and sees her, having soiled herself on the carpet and seemingly vomited on herself, she says something like, "I ate a bug," which is something either a child or a pet, if they could talk, would say. She's also lit in a really interesting way. So when she's sort of skulking in corners or standing in the dark and her eyes are lit up orange, incredible cinematography in this film. Excellent lighting. Given that it was done like a $750,000 budget, just really ingenuitive by the filmmaker. She looks like a cat. She looks like his deceased cat that he failed to take care of. And if you can't take care of a cat, I suggest that you both can't be a good spouse, a good husband, and you certainly can't take care of the children that are meant to come from a relationship, because the entire point of a relationship is to build a family. It's not just for your own gratification. That is a modern myth that is causing a lot of animosity between men and women. So not only is Nikki depicted as a kind of adult toddler, which makes her behavior so unsettling, and therefore so threatening, so volatile, so unpredictable, but she's also depicted as an animal, and one that is wholly dependent, but also can get violent. So that's all of the male elements of the nightmare. The female elements of the nightmare are, again, the metaphor that the supernatural element amplifies, of women waking up one day and, thanks to the uncertainty of modern dating, getting into a safe relationship that they then realize they don't want to be in. They've wasted years of their life. They fundamentally don't trust the man they're with to protect and provide for them. And this sets them at odds with men in general. And this is a very common thing. And I know there are lots of people that will blame women for this and say, well, she chose this. And yes, okay. But don't forget, women are mass medicated from their early teens. And this plays havoc with their hormones, their mental state, and it distorts the kinds of men that they're attracted to. It disables their histocompatibility detectors, so they aren't quite literally sniffing out the ideal partner based on genetic compatibility. Birth control causes women, as Dr. Sarah Hill has written before in Your Brain on Birth Control and said in interviews, birth control means that women are attracted to men they usually wouldn't be attracted to. She says, research suggests pill-taking women in their state of artificial progesterone dominance, because the pill is often artificial progesterone, and lacking a cyclical estrogen urge, seem to prefer the faces of men who are less masculine. The implication is that if a woman chooses her partner when she's on the pill and then goes off it, it might lead to relationship dissatisfaction because she no longer finds herself as attracted to the person as when she got into the relationship. It's a possibility that women should at least keep in mind. When women get into relationships while they're on the pill and stop the pill while they're in the relationship, many find they're no longer attracted to their boyfriend or, God forbid, husband. And, this was a study that was published in The Atlantic quite some time ago, when they compared more masculine faces to more feminine faces. Women on the pill preferred the feminine faces, and women off the pill, fertile, ovulating, preferred the masculine faces. And that's because women, when they're looking for a husband to have a family with, they're looking for markers of genetic health, which is displayed externally in square jaws, larger muscles, deeper voices, the typical markers of testosterone. Whereas women, when they're in a state of artificial pregnancy, because they're taking artificial progesterone via birth control, and that their body thinks they're perpetually pregnant, then they're looking for men with softer features who are more likely to be dependable, as reliant on them as they are, as a pregnant woman or a woman with young children eventually, as their body's preparing for it, on the man. And so they're looking for a provider. I mean, this is pejoratively called the alpha fucks, beta bucks dichotomy. And, I mean, David Buss, evolutionary psychologist who originally came up with this dual mate hypothesis, has found in follow-up studies he hasn't been able to replicate it one-to-one, But, anecdotally and in various studies on birth control, there seems to be a pattern. And at the very least, it has entered dating discourse, so it is shaping the perceptions of Zoomers who are engaged in these online gender conversations. Or it's just in the cultural atmosphere, so they imbibe it via cultural osmosis. And what I think women are afraid of is waking up one day and finding themselves with a beta that they think is wretched, weak, and is so worried about being alone and rejected that they will contort themselves into any shape that the woman will demand in order to stay with them. And a woman doesn't want that. She doesn't want to be a mother to her own husband. Why would you? And this is a warning to men. If you aren't upstanding enough, if you aren't courageous enough to get a woman who demands courage from you, you will get a woman who is equally as desperate not to be abandoned, and, like Nikki, like the BPD girls that she is a supernatural parody of, they will try to augment their own identities, which is uncertain to start with, which they're using you to soothe their anxieties about. They will augment their own identities to such a distorted degree that they'll be unrecognizable and very unpredictable when you're in a relationship with them. Example, she kills Sarah in a fit of jealousy. Nikki bashes her head into a brick in a car, and then rather than disposing of her body, as she tells Bear, she takes the body home, strips it naked, decapitates the body, wears Sarah's hair on her scalp like a wig, wears Sarah's dress and draws tattoos all over herself to approximate Sarah's visage, because the jealous, possessed Nikki thinks that because Bear was having this emotionally intimate moment with Sarah, who had professed her feelings for Bear, then if she just becomes Sarah, wearing her skin like a leather face mask, then Bear will be more infatuated with Nikki. And it's also very telling that Nikki is the only person in the film that actually owns something. There's this tragic moment where he opens her college admissions letter, which they were going to open together right before Nikki kills her, and finds that she actually did get her place in college after all. So it is this desire for the unearned. It is this unwillingness to be honest. It is the perverse incentives of Gen Z dating culture that produces the dynamics at play in obsession, which are then amplified by the supernatural element. And that supernatural element enables us to pull on the themes. And this is a very real thing about a kind of feedback loop that leads men and women to hate one another because women select men they don't respect, and men are, in many instances, too worried about the social backlash that will result from approaching women that they either don't approach or they approach dishonestly. Because as we know, men and women are seriously at odds, politically, socially, in our respective countries. I mean, there was this famous New Statesman piece and polling that found that while young men have a positive opinion of young women are largely hostile or, at the very least, indifferent to young men. And in a series of interviews conducted by Emily Lawford, excellent journalist, for the New Statesman, in the follow-up to this polling, she spoke to a series of very progressive young women on university campuses, and one woman was called Anna, and Anna detailed how she was seeking personal independence payments, disability benefits, and that she felt emotionally tortured by the lack of solidarity on issues like poverty or women's rights or the Israel-Palestine war from the state. She feels that politics offer her a full-body experience. Lots of other women in this article said that women feel things more deeply than men, and they are frustrated when men don't express their emotional solidarity with women and instead just focus on trying to fix problems in political circles. Again, a mismatch of expectation between men and women that causes frustration. And she says there's a real sense of panic and hopelessness about politics. We have policies that aren't looking after us. But she has a boyfriend, and the man in her life is not soothing her anxieties. Instead, she describes her boyfriend as, quote, a fucking Labrador. She says he's reading books about how climate change isn't that big a deal, and it's hard to separate from the fact that he's not really faced much adversity in his life as a straight white man who is privately educated. I'm probably the adversity in his life. If you as a man don't confront challenges, including wooing a woman in the first place, then women won't respect you, and some women will take it upon themselves to become the adversity in your life. This is something that has been observed all the way back to, Dostoevsky in Notes from Underground, where the protagonist is talking to the prostitute that he's attempting to woo at the end of the novel. And he says, some women will start arguments with their husband just for the sake of it, just to see if he still is passionate enough about her to get angry about it. And this is what lots of BPD women will do. They will start arguments to test whether or not their spouse still loves them enough to have the argument. And I had this, I speak from experience here. I had a girlfriend who would start arguments because she felt angry at me and had to have the argument to work out why she was angry. This sort of circular logic pattern driven entirely by an insatiable emotion. She also attempted to steal the very computer that I'm making this video on right now and then sue me for my own belongings after I got it back. Just completely unhinged behavior. She wasn't even the worst. Again, like Bear, I've had women scream at me in public places. I've been there, and lots of men that have watched Obsession have been there, and that's why it resonates with them. And I think it resonates because the men that do risk going out there, putting themselves out there, when a woman expresses interest in them, it's a bit like dropping a handkerchief in the 19th century, or a woman extending her hand so that you can take it and then lead the dance. You think that she is expressing interest in you and you can't believe your luck, and that this is just two interested parties engaging in a relationship, when instead it's her trying to put the honeymoon phase up front, like the montage in the film, immediately after Bear decides to take Nikki at her word, take her excuse that she was on MDMA for why she was behaving weirdly, and she shows up at his house in the middle of the night and says that she actually has feelings for him. They put all of the honeymoon phase up front to try and lock in your investment, and then their flaws start to show. And so the message of Obsession is men need the prerequisite virtue and courage, not just to go and approach women, but to ensure you don't get in relationships with dangerous women that will make up for your deficit in courage with investing really early, and you think that you've just had this perfect relationship easy. Nothing that you get for free actually is without a price. Again, old Faustian bargain. And for women, it's to avoid beta orbiters. It's to avoid knowingly taking advantage of men that you've kept in the friend zone, because they will have untoward desires towards you. And they might not use a supernatural one-wish willow to act on it, but it's still a kind of sordid arrangement that will engender resentment. And it's to ensure that you actually don't forfeit your dignity by getting into situationships, by putting out early, and then finding yourself in a relationship with a man that you are ultimately repulsed by, and then you are forced to have an existential crisis about, and that you've made decisions that will impact your future relationships that you can't take back. And ultimately, Obsession is a message for, I think, Gen Z, because things are too far gone for us. I've got a grey patch in my beard. We're starting to get a bit old. But it's for Gen Z to rebuild those courtship rituals, those cultural guardrails, for subsequent generations, so that they aren't thrown to the emotional wolves like we were. Anyway, I thought this was a really interesting film. I think everyone should watch it. It might still be in cinemas, otherwise, when it hits streaming, definitely it's worth your time. It's really disturbing, though. It sat with me for a few days, and if you have been in a relationship like the one depicted, it'll bring back memories, man. But that's just a testament to how good the performances were, how impeccable the writing and the film craft was, and it's also encouraging that we're getting through a cultural bottleneck, because this was made by a YouTuber, so was the movie Backrooms. I haven't seen that yet. But we're getting to the stage now where Zoomers, having grown up as autodidacts on the internet, are bypassing the traditional studio structure using YouTube, and then getting picked up by studios who have a dearth of talent, are making incredible projects on shoestring budgets, and are ensuring that we have not just good films to watch, but representative generational films. So that's positive to end on. I hope you will get fulfilling relationships, because dating as a Zoomer is just a nightmare, man.